Tamang kaalaman tungo sa malayang kaisipan. Ako po si Ferdy Isleta.
Ang kultura ay susi sa kadakilaan. Ako po si Annie Luis.
Isang oras ng ang kailangan. Ako po si Renena Peñas at ito ang
Padayon Presents the NCCA Hour. Sulong na!
Padayon, the NCCA Hour. Sulong na!
Isa siya sa pinakamagaling na panelist sa workshop. Madalas siya nakaganon sa workshop. I hate this text because I can see myself in this text.
Sa bawat pahina, may kapangyarihan ng isang aklat na ilakbay ang kanyang mambabasa tungo sa ibang dimensyon at panahon. Samantala, ang kahusayan ng isang manunulat ay makikita naman sa puwersa ng kanyang hiraya, paggamit ng titik, at malikhayang paraan sa pagmumulat ng kanyang mambabasa, patungo sa katotohanan na nakasilid sa loob ng kanyang pagkatao, tungo sa kaalaman na nagbibigay liwanag sa kanyang isipan. Ito ang panitikang pamana ng isa sa pinakamahuhusay na kwentista, mananaysay at periodistang Filipino, ang pamanang kultura ni Pambansang Alagad ng Sining Francisco Arcellana.
He was as close to a Renaissance man that I've ever known. Kasi broad range of topics talaga. He had something to say.
Franz was something of a cryptic person. You had to figure out what he was telling you.
He was an invaluable mentor. Again, also, not just sa literary, yung humanity, yung pagkatao.
Santa Cruz, Manila, ika-6 ng Setyembre, taong 1916, ipinanganak ang ika-4 sa 18 supling ng mag-asawang Jose Arcellana at Epifania Quino. Si Zacarias Eugenio Francisco Quino Arcellana ay mas kilala bilang Paking sa kanyang pamilya at Franz sa kanyang malalapit na kaibigan. Kabiyak ng puso ni Emerenciana Yuvienko, pagmamahalang nagbunga ng 6 na supling.
Papa was very musical also, Magaling siya mag-piano. So, when we were at home and I was growing up, pag nagpipiano siya, kumakanta kami. Yung minsan lang, mababasa na niya, tutugtog na niya.
Ang favorite food niya ay mango and rice. I remember him eating that a lot. And ice cream. Ang favorite niyang ice cream was arce, makapuno.
Dinapuan ng batang si Paking ng polio na naging dahilan ng kanyang pagkaratay ng 1 linggo. Sa kabila ng kanyang pagkakasakit, natuklasan niya ang kasiyahan sa pagbasa. Mula noon, bawat mundo ng librong kanyang mahawakan ay kanyang pinasok. Habang siya'y nagpadala sa bawat sulok ng kanyang imahinasyon, ang kanyang interes sa pagbasa ay mahigit pa sa 1 libangan. Batang mag-aaral pa lamang, nahiligan na ni Paking ang magsulat. Nag-umpisa sa mga tula hanggang natutunan niya magsulat ng iba't ibang anyo ng literatura. Nang siya'y tumungtong ng high school, sumali si Francisco sa pahayagan ng kanyang paaralan, ang Torres Torch ng Manila West High School, na kalaunang tinawag ng Torres High School. Nang siya'y 16 na taong gulang pa lamang, nailathala sa magazine Graphic ang kanyang kauna-unahang katang The Man Who Could Be Paul. Sa parehong taon at sa parehong pahayagan, nailathala din ang isa pa sa kanyang maikling kwento, ang Frankie. Simula noon, isa pa sa kanyang maikling kwento ang nailathala bago pa man siya pumasok ng kolehiyo.
Yung mga story niya, akala mo kung saan pupunta until umiikot lang pala. Ganon. Until may estilo siya talaga.
Francisco Arcellana was always known for his lyrical prose. In other words, even if he was writing a short story, it rendered like a poem. And that actually is corollary to what I was telling you now. He always used the right words. And it did not have to be long.
Alam mo kung titignan ko, parang siyang makatang magsulat ng tula at ng tuluyan o prose. Kasi kapag naglilinya siya, yung open or close things, yung parang simple lang, mas parang naalala ko parang John Lennonish. Pagdating sa prosa, dala-dala niya yung ugali o habit ng isang makata. Kahit nagsusulat siya ng pangungusap, yun ang pansin ko sa kanya. Meron siyang control ng isang makata sa pagsusulat ng kwento. Na matipid siya kasi parang kung iisipin mo, mapagnilay kapag sumusulat siya ng bawat linya.
Noong kolehiyo, kumuha ng kursong medisina si Francisco Arcellana. Ngunit nagbago siya ng direksyon, pang-akademya. At sa halip, nagtapos siya ng pilosopiya sa taong 1939. Sa loob ng kanyang buhay kolehiyo, ay naging aktibong parte siya ng pahayagan ng universidad, ang Philippine Collegian, habang patuloy ang pakikipaglathala ng kanyang marami pang tula at maiikling kwento sa mga pahayagan sa loob at labas ng paaralan. Dahil sa angking galing at kahusayan ng kanyang mga akda, inanyayahan ni Ginoong Manuel Arguilla si Arcellana na sumali sa UP Writers Club. Bahagi rin ng grupong Veronicans si Francisco Arcellana, grupo ng mga matatapang na mga manunulat na kinabibilangan ng 13 miyembro na sumasalungat sa tradisyonal na forma at paksa sa panitikang Pilipino, isa pang pampanitikang revolusyon, na kung saan na ang rebelyon ni Jose Garcia Villa laban sa burgis na moralidad ay nagsilbing inspirasyon ng grupo ng manunulat, gaya nila Narciso Reyes, Bienvenido Santos, NVM Gonzales at marami pang iba.
Napansin ko kung gaano siya kakalmado sa paraan ng kanyang pagpapahayag ng kanya saloobin kahit napakagulo ng panahon. Tinuturoan na tayo na magkaroon ng klaro at matatag na pag-iisip sa panahon ng ligali.
Mapili nga siya sa kanyang gamit ng salita. No? Sa tingin ko, yun yung isang katangian niya. Kaya siguro, natural lang na mangilan-ngilan lang kumpara sa iba. Ang kanya nagawa kasi, kumbaga pag naglabas siya talagang pulidong-pulido.
Matapos ang gera, naging tagawasto si Arcellana ng patalastas ng Ramon Roses Publication. Sumali rin siya sa ahensya ng World Advertising Associates na kung saan ang punong opisina ay nasa New York. Nagsimula siya bilang transcriber hanggang sa maging Manila Bureau Manager ng International News Service nito. Bago maging profesor si Francisco Arcellana, ay namayagpag ang kanyang karera sa larangan ng periodismo. Naging manunulat, kolumnista at editor siya ng iba't ibang magazines at publication. Naging tagapayo din siya ng Philippine Collegian ng UP. Ang kanyang column na Through a Glass Darkly ay isa sa naging kahangahangang ehemplo na mahusay na pagsusulat habang patuloy ang pagtangkilik sa kanyang maikling mga kwento na sikat sa mga mambabasa.
Among his works, my favorite is Trilogy of the Turtle. Maybe because, Grandpa was, I think, a true romantic at heart. And I mean, the late 19th century romantic na the idea that even if you do not consummate a love, you just love. Parang ganun, na the philosophy na it is better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. He was like that. He would give everything.
Totoo, sobrang chill. Pag binasa mo siya, parang umaayos yung paligid. Ganun uri siya ng writer.
Naimbitahan siya maging bahagi ng Universidad ng Pilipinas bilang kanilang unang press relations officer. Dito nagsimula ang kanyang karera sa pagtuturo. Nagsimula bilang instruktor sa Department of English and Comparative Literature taong 1953. Kinalaunan ay naging ganap na profesor si Francisco Arcellana.
He's known to be a writer, but a big part of his life, he was a teacher.
May pagka-strange kasi magturo si Franz eh. Yung parang akala mo, circuitous, circumlocutory yung salita niya, yung monologue niya, hindi mo maintindihan until he delivers the point.
Mahusay siyang pumuna ng trabaho. Sasabihin niya yung mga kalakasan at kahinaan noong trabaho. Pero minsan ay hindi siya direktang magsasabi sa iyo kung ano yung problema. Magbibigay siya ng ilang mga pangungusap at para sa iyo na ang pag-iisip kung ano ibig sabihin nun. So doon mismo, parang kang tinetesting din.
Siya ang naging kauna-unahang direktor ng UP Creative Writing Center kung saan ay nanatili siyang tagapangulo hanggang 1982. Di nagtagal, ginawaran siya ng estadong profesor emeritus hanggang kanyang tinanggap ang pinakamataas na pagkilala ng universidad. Taong 1989, ang honoris causa. Sa ilalim ng kanyang paninilbihan bilang guro sa loob ng halos 3 dekada, sumailalim sa kanya ang dima bilang ng mga manunulat na kilala sa iba't ibang industriya ng panitikan. Naririyan sina Butch Dalisay, Erwin Castillo, Charleston Ong, Mara Lanot, Maylin Paterno Locsin at marami pang ibang impluensyal na mga manunulat.
Department of English and Comparative Literature sa UP na magkaroon ng Francisco Arcellana Scholarship. So, naging bahagi ako noon. Mga ilang taon kami nagbibigay ng mapipili nilang scholar. Ang ganda nun kasi si Ginong Arcellana, hindi nyo na itatanong, ay isa ring bilingual poet or writer. Kasi nagsulat din naman siya sa Filipino. Katunayan, siya ang nagbigay ng introduksyon sa libro ng ama ng modernistang panulaang Pilipino na si Alejandro Garcia Abadilla. Nagbibigay si Ginang Arcellana ng scholarship sa mga batang nagsusulat sa Ingles, tapos sa susunod na taon sa Filipino, tapos sa Ingles, sa Filipino, kasi nga bilingual siya.
Meron kami planong libro gumawa ng parang anecdotes and apocrypha on Philippine literature. Yung mga much-told tales of writers repartying one another or mga sagutan. Ganyan. But there was an incident, ayaw nga kung talaga nangyari, no? Na magkasama sila ni Ricardo de Metillo sa Dumaguete. Naglalakad daw sila sa beach. Sabi daw ni Ricardo ni Ricky kay Franz, I think I have a new book coming out. I just finished a lot of verses. And what do you think I should title the collection? Sabi daw ni Franz, why not, Seizures on the Seashore.
Habang patuloy siya sa pagiging isa sa mga mahahalagang pasimuno ng Filipinong modernong anyo ng maiikling kwento, siya ang nangunguna sa pagpapaunlad ng maikling kwento bilang lirikal na prosa at makatang anyo at nagpanatiling buhay ng tradisyong eksperimental sa pagsusulat.
Sa amin magkakapatid, syempre all of us love the prayer. I think yung prayer is kahit saan mo dalhin, kahit saan mo, I've used it a lot, even for my lectures sa College of Medicine, yung last two na affirm, the long-denied Lord, fulfill the unfulfilled. I think those are, pretty immortal lines.
So Franz actually covered a lot of material. But, he would write about love, he would write about war, about Filipino families, and of course about literature.
Kathang isip man o base sa katotohanan ng kanyang mga kwento, ang naging salamin ng mga ito upang maaninag ang realidad na ginagalawan ng mga tao sa kanilang lipunan, habang ipinapabatid niya ang mga katotohanang di maipagkakaila sa kanyang mambabasa.
Ang nilaunch natin ngayon ay tinatawag na National Artist Francisco Arcellana Binder. Ito po ay nagtatampok ng 4 na lesson plan na batay sa gawa ni Francisco Arcellana, National Artist for Literature. So yung una pong lesson plan, comic book and the maths. Isa pong lesson plan ay tungkol naman po sa A Marriage Was Made. Isa po siyang maikling kwento. Itinuro niya po kung paano magagamit ang sayaw sa pag-a-analyze ng short story. At ang isa pa pong lesson plan ay tungkol naman po siya sa Trilogy of the Turtle. Ang pinagsalib naman po ng mga ng sining ay fiction and speech choir. At ang ika-4 ay tungkol naman po sa akdang prayer. Isa siyang tula ni Francisco Arcellana. At paano ito lalahukan ng musika.
Hopefully, this Arcellana 101 will get the ball rolling again because when we were conceptualizing what we wanted for the centennial, the family stressed that what we want is for this generation to discover the Arcellana works and to be inspired to create art on their own.
Sa loob ng maraming dekada, ang mga tula, sanaysay at kwento, pampanitikang obra ni Ginoong Francisco Arcellana at pagtuturo ay tumanggap ng maraming papuri, gawad at pagkilala. Ang kanyang pagiging pambansang alagad ng sining ay isa lamang sa pagkilala para sa kanyang kahusayan. Bagkus, ang tunay na pagpaparangal sa kanyang mga naiambag, kadakilaan at dedikasyon sa pagpapaunlad sa Filipinong panitikan ay makikita sa pamamagitan ng pagpapanatiling buhay ng kanyang mga akda.
And what Francis' elevation to national artist meant for people like me was that may kwenta, ang maikling kwento bilang sarili niyang art form sapagkat napakahirap magsulat ng mahusay na maikling kwento.
Because he's an example of an artist and a writer who really has not been appreciated kasi hindi alam ng mga bata hindi nila nabasa, except for those na sa UP naging estudyante niya.
He was really highly regarded in UP. Siya lang ang alam kong professor ng English na nagkaroon nun. A reading room na named after him. You know, that was how much he was loved.
Nagkataon nung siya ay pinagtataluhan kung siya ay gagawing pambansang alagad ng sining. Mga orhado, naninipisan sa dami ng kanyang akda. So sabi nila, kakaunti lang o kulang. Pero hindi ko malimutan na sinabi ng isa sa makanyang abogado, hindi mo maililibro ang impluwensya ni Arcellana sa mga batang manunulat. At ako ay saksi doon. Hindi makukuha yung pagpili ng pambansang alagad ng sining sa kapal ng libro. Pwede kang maging alagad ng sining na pambansa kung ikaw ay maraming natulungang bata. Maaaring hindi direkta dahil nabasa niyo ang tula mo, na mulat sila, nahikayat na magsulat, at sa tingin ko, yun ang nagawa ng isang Arcellana.
Ang kanyang pangalan at kahusayan bilang manunulat ay mananatiling matingkad upang mapasalamatan ang kanyang ambag na yaman sa Filipinong kalinangan.
Yung being a strong family person, being very loving, having a close-knit, with siblings and parents. I think those are solid Filipino values which probably he will be remembered for.
Mostly, mga home circumstances. No? It's either the relationship between man and wife or within a family or family and neighbors. Ganun. Very grounded, in effect. No? Tsaka iba yung estilo ni Franz. Parang walang katulad eh. Singular yung style niya. Very spare language, very short stories. Hindi siya yung lyrical na nagsosoar pareho ni Joaquin o ni Reliedo o ni Brillantes. But very, very singular style na iba.
And I think he would admit this. He was a very cosmopolitan writer. He was really a city-based writer. He was not a Gilya. He was not NVM. And he was a writer of the moment, of his time. He did not go off into ruminations about the 19th century. So he was different from them in that way, and I think it's difference that we should appreciate.
I touched her, yes, but she moved for me. I touched her, but I touched her lightly.
Ama, asawa, kritiko, guro, periodista, mananaysay, makata at kwentista, kahanga-hangang Filipinong manunulat, dakila ng pambansang alagad ng sining sa panitikan, Francisco Arcellana, Pambansang Alagad ng Sining, Sagisag Kultura ng Pilipinas.
Ako ay Pilipino, lahing matapang, lahing matalino, nalakbay ko ng mundo.
Walang unos o bagyo sa aking gugupo, lahi ng matatag. Ako ay Filipino.
Ako ay Filipino.
Ako'y makadiyos.
Ako ay Filipino.
Ako'y makatao, saan man makarating, sino mang makapiling.
Aangat ang galing habang buhay, Filipino.
Tumipot sandaang mga isla, magkakahiwalay ngunit nagkakaisa. Tahanan ng aming lahi, mga pook na aming ninimithi.
puno ng kasaysayan, puno ng hiwaga. Sa mga lugar na ito nakatanim ang ugat ng pagka-Pilipino. Ako ay Pilipino, ako'y makadiyos. Ako ay Pilipino, ako'y makatao. Saan man makarating, sino mang makapiling, aangat ang galing habang buhay. Pilipino.
Kami ang lahing kayumanggi mula sa bughaw na langit at dagat. Mula sa pulang alimoy dugo, hinalo sa dilaw na araw at bituin.
Yan ang kulay ng katatagan, yan ang kulay ng kagitingan, uungkapang na sumisigaw. Yan ang Pilipino. Ako ay Pilipino, ako'y makadiyos. Ako ay Pilipino, ako'y makatao. Saan man makarating, sino mang makapiling, aangat ang galing habang buhay. Pilipino.
Ito ba'y dala ng pagkakataon o sadyang pinuot naging okasyon? Pagdiriwang ang aming kasiyahan, ipinagbubunyi.
In a world and time when so much is changing, there is still so much of our culture that has to be documented and kept alive. Who are the bearers of these precious living cultures? How do they pass on a knowledge transmitted through the ages? What they represent has survived colonization, conflict, marginalization, and yet they persist. Sila ang sisidlan, the living vessels that store Dayaw, our knowledge, our pride. Welcome to the 4th season of Dayaw. In the past 3 seasons, we have explored the fast-vanishing natural world of our indigenous people. We've seen how these environments have helped shape not just their survival, but the very cultures which allow them to declare and be proud of their identities. We've discovered how they use the materials and resources which may help build and unify a nation. In the season of Dayaw, we meet the culture bearers, men and women who have devoted their entire lives to preserving what is vital and important to their cultures, our culture. Their life work may seem so far removed from some of our concerns, yet they push on in the face of so much indifference. That is why they remain relevant to this day, and that is why their achievements must be recognized. The Kawad sa Manlilikha ng Bayan, or the National Living Treasures Award, is a distinction accorded by the Philippine government to the finest traditional artists of the land. The search is conducted by the National Commission for Culture and the Arts and an ad hoc panel of experts. The distinction was institutionalized through Republic Act 7355 in April of 1992. Since its inception, the award has been bestowed on 13 traditional artists.
We have a very rich tradition of people's art. And this is really a source of identity for the Filipinos. Our traditional artists, sometimes called craft people, are the keepers of our soul, or the bearers of Filipino soul. And it's important to preserve their work because otherwise we will have nothing to be proud of to the rest of the world. The intention of the NCCA in the initial search was to look for the most accomplished weavers, mat makers, storytellers, and other kinds of traditional artists to showcase the creative spirit of the Filipino. And that's why we really looked for those people, our treasures, that have been able to preserve our traditions from the earliest time to the present, unadulterated by commercial trappings or some modernizing influence that may not blend with our traditions. That was really the intention from the very beginning until now.
Professor Elena Mirano, an educator, researcher, scholar, musicologist, was elected head of the Gamaba Committee by its members, where she served until 2015.
The Gamaba has been a very sincere effort to recognize the fact that we have a living culture, that it's not just a Western culture, that we have we have embedded in us this cultural, well, actually it's a bedrock of culture that continues to exist until the present day, many times unnoticed or unrecognized. But there is a need to recognize, because unless we answer that question, then we won't know who we are. We'll only know some layer. But the really deepest layer comes from the tradition. And so, in that sense, Gamaba is a questioning of the self also. Who are we? Why are we here? How do we structure our space, our time, our visual images? And in choosing what we think is the best, and it has to be the best, so we honor the best.
The Gawad Manlilikha ng Bayan has reaped a rich harvest of indigenous Filipinos who have exemplified the very highest standards of their cultures. Unfortunately, many of the awardees from the first batch of Gamaba winners have passed on. And here, precious footage, recording of their voices, their thoughts, aspirations of past masters, musicians, weavers, chanters, all were artists whose gifts to this nation live on, even in death. All who heard him play on the two-string kudyapi knew that they were in the presence of a great artist. The instrument that he chose to express this virtuosity was the most technically difficult of the two-stringed lutes popular among both the Islamic and animist people of Mindanao. Of its two strings, one provided the rhythmic drone, while the other has movable frets that allow melodies to be played in two sets of pentatonic scales. Scholars have described the music of the Maguindanao Kudyapi as mystical, delicate, celebrative. But all words pale when one listens to existing footage of Samaon Sulaiman. No explanations, no academic notes can quite explain the hypnotic and sensual quality of his music.
The late, great Samaon Sulaiman, a fantastic performer. I was told by one Maguindanao, who's from a different part of Cotabato, that when Samaon plays, he speaks, and you can hear what he's saying, and it's so beautiful. He was really a wonderful artist on the Kudyapi. He really imbibed yung spirit of being Filipino. Kasi for him, it was not just his community. Although he lived in his community, he worked there. When there were other events in other parts of the Philippines involving Gamaba, he would go. He went as far as Kalinga.
The idea of artists in our culture, in our traditional culture, is not a narrow specialist who does only art and does nothing else. Saman Suleiman is different because he was not just an artist. Nowadays, he was a complete person. His being an artist, his being a contemporary performer, did not prevent him from cultivating his other levels of being. In fact, he was a good father, he was a farmer, he was an imam, in other words, a Muslim priest. At the same time, he was the favorite barber in his town. In our traditional culture, we have a holistic notion of being, holistic notion of a person. You could invite him anywhere, he would appear and he will be honoring you with his presence in whatever occasion. Until now, I cannot understand how the Maguindanao, especially Saman Suleiman, could tell stories using this instrument.
Saman Suleiman was not just a musician or soloist. He was a virtuoso, a man whose gift of interpretation elevated his musicianship to a realm where both tradition and self-expression meet to create art. I think the same can be said of the other deceased Gamaba awardees, whatever their fields. A chanter of epics and storyteller from the Macagua Valley in Palawan, Masino Interay was also a poet and musician. In 1993, just as he was about to be declared among the first recipients of the Gamaba distinction, he was recorded in the forests of Brooks Point, where he chanted a portion of a Palawanon epic. He also demonstrated his skill at reciting the lyrical poem Kulilal, as well as a bagit, verse inspired by the images and animals of his forest home. Then, together with his friends, he played on the basal ensemble, a mix of large and small agong, accompanied by the gimbal or tubular drum, to the joy of the villagers. Complementing the music was the dancing of the women, their feet beating out complementary rhythms on the bamboo floor of the community house.
Masino Interay of Brooks Point, who was a storyteller and a musician. He was able to preserve the very important traditions, the tultul, storytelling, the sanang ensemble, musical ensemble, and unfortunately he passed away around 5 years ago. But his children are continuing the tradition in Brooks Point.
In our search for the exotic and colorful other, we often overlook the true gifts of a people. In the case of Masino Interay, his gift mirrors the traditional Palawanon knowledge of the forests, the stars, and the cosmos, a universe he was at home with, a cosmos that was home to his people. Creative memory, endurance, clarity of intellect, and spiritual purpose. For these most valuable of possessions, Masino Interay was found worthy.
Prioritize those traditions that are very important in establishing that we have a very high degree of culture from the very beginning, even before the Spaniards came. That's why we prioritize those craftspeople, artists like Ginaw Bilog, who was a Mangyan that really devoted his own life, to preserve as much as possible the Ambahan tradition in Oriental Mindoro, using the Surat Mangyan, or what we call Baybayin. And so this is really a tradition worth preserving, simply because in many other parts of the country, this Surat Mangyan or Baybayin is no longer used.
Ginaw Bilog, a Hanunuo Mangyan from Mansalay Oriental, Mindoro, grew up still hearing the Ambahan poetry used by his community to express love, traditional wisdom, sage advice, common courtesies, and humor. The 7-syllable lines conveyed messages through the use of metaphor and creative images. He also grew up using the Surat Mangyan, the pre-colonial syllabary that links the Mangyan to other Southeast Asian cultures. His mastery of this difficult form and his desire to revive and popularize it among the young Mangyan made him worthy of the Gamaba distinction. Today, the heritage that Ginaw Bilog helped revive is carried on by his family, his children, who were his most ardent students. It doesn't seem surprising that the first batch of female Gamaba awardees were weavers. Weaving is, after all, an art associated with women. The skill of these Gamaba winners covered difficult techniques such as weaving in abaka ikat, silk, or even natural fibers. Even today, among the Tiboli of Lake Cebu, the name of Langdulay is spoken of in awe and admiration. Her legacy as the first ever Tiboli weaver to be awarded the Gawad sa Manlilikanang Bayan extends far beyond her skill at weaving abaca fibers into tinalak cloth. Her mastery of the process of dyeing the threads and producing both traditional as well as contemporary adaptations of these designs gained her many students and followers.
Without any paper, without anything to copy, Langdulay just makes designs. And when this is dyed, and woven, the designs come out. The tinalak is a marvel of design, intuitively done by the designer, Langdulay. And the Tibolis are very, very proud of having her. In fact, they were so surprised during her funeral. Well, some kind of celebrity, more than what the Tibolis have witnessed when it comes to burying their high political officials. In other words, even the high political officials were not buried in the same grand manner as Langdulay, especially during the necrological services. We are sad, but her legacy will always remain, simply because she made the Tibolis much prouder because of her creations.
What I do remember about Langdulay, the legendary Langdulay, is the fact that she had not only weaving virtuosity, but she was also a leader. She was a leader. Her school was a big school, and she had many followers, and she was able to train many of them. And I heard her once talking about what she had learned from the Gamaba and about the the other international events that she had been brought to, and she said something like, you know, I learned the value of education. Sabi niya, education is so important. And so she was talking to the younger people in her village, and she was saying, so if I were you, that's what I would invest in. That's why her school was one of the most successful of all the Gamaba schools.
Ang yu kalawi ro tinanay, bayu alakom jagonan hayu kagano mudu di dag katanan da goberno. Jagonan hayu kagano mudu na tayligan. Hasa mudu na. Demud kembe ho bali mesti. Ini kengah nagi unon ligana wa.
Saling tama noon is a Bagobo from Davao del Sur. Just like Lang Dulay, she was able to preserve the identity of the Bagobo of Davao del Sur through her very intricate and very colorful weaves. She left a very, very good legacy to her children.
Although inabal, the abaka ikat produced by the Bagobo is not as visually stunning as a tinalak of the Tiboli. The dual tinali patterns are more minute and difficult to execute. Salinta Monon, a Tagabawa Bagobo weaver from Bansalan, Davao del Sur, specialized in the complex small-scale ikat technique.
Salinta Monon became the fast friend of Lang Dulay. They were best friends. They had a chance to meet each other when they came to Manila for the awarding of the Gamaba. So when Lang opened her school, Salinta was there. She was a quieter person. And I think very introspective kasi what I remember about her is she wouldn't let people come near her house. She had a weaving house of her own. She would be alone before she wove. And so all the time she would be weaving. Walang pwedeng manggulo sa kanya. So talagang very introspective na tao si Salinta.
Two other weavers were also given the Gamaba distinction. While Lang Dulay and Salinta Monon wove in abaca fiber, the next two gawad sa Manlilikanang Bayan awardees spent their lives mastering different fibers.
Haji Amina P. From Tawi-Tawi is a very humble person. This is one thing that you will see, you will realize when you look at all without exception, all the Manlilikanang Bayan, they are very humble. They don't have a concept of themselves as the source of power, because their concept of the source of their creative power is from the above, from a higher source, God or the great divine spirit. And they are just a channel of this creative spirit. So this is what you notice in Amina Api. She's a very humble person, but she's very good in using her intuition to create from just 2 or 3 strands very beautiful mats.
The mat or banig produced by the weavers of Ungus Matata in Tawi-Tawi are renowned for their dizzying and complex geometric designs, the high density and surface sheen of the woven surface. as well as the amazing, often surprising color combinations. Hadja Amina Api's body of work was honored by the Gamaba Committee for the finer details often overlooked by other weavers. They cited the straightness of her edging and the mastery of such complicated designs as the sasa and kima-kima. She was also an expert at all the stages of mat weaving, from the processing of the wild pandan leaves to the use of natural and commercial dyes. Her exuberant sense of color was also much admired. Silk, the production of its threads, and the weaving of these threads into garments and wraps both for men and women, was a highlight on the weaving tradition of Islamic Filipinos. Among the tausug, the pishiabit was a square textile prized for the intricacy of its design, as well as the suppleness of the silk thread. The tradition of silk weaving has long died out and is only recently being revived. But in the work of Darhata Sawabi, the colorful and complex design aesthetic of the tausug pishiabit lived on in cotton and commercial threads. Darhata Sawabi of Barangay Parang in Holo was perhaps the last master of this jewel of Philippine textile. Never married, she managed to attain financial independence through the weaving of pishiabit, a woven square, 39 by 40 inches, took 3 months to weave. For her masterworks, she charged only 2,000 pesos apiece. This is the quandary that many of our traditional artists face.
Darhata Sawabi was a master of this pishiabit. You really marvel at the intricacy of the design, very finely detailed, very colorful. We're hoping that we will find somebody who is as good as her. Because we know that she was not the only one in her town or in her province to really practice this tradition. And I really one of the admirers of this tradition. And Darhata Sawabi's legacy should really continue.
If not for the efforts of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts and the late Susan Calo Medina, we would have almost no documentation of this first set of Gawad Manlilikha ng Bayan awardees. Sadly, all of them have passed on, but their gifts to the nation are immortal and must be acknowledged.
Nagtitipon po tayo ngayon bilang isang bayan upang bigyan parangal at pagkilala ang ating mga katangi-tanging manlilikha. Sa pagharap natin sa modernong panahon at sa samot-saring impluwensya ng ibang kultura, pinatitingkad ng kanilang likhang sining ang ating pagka-Pilipino.
It's very important that they be recognized as important in a society where we only look at sometimes materialistic things as parang indicators of success. But you can see how yung spirit ng mga artists, they come through. But they're quiet mostly. So you have to honor that quietness. They have a sense of self. They know who they are. And because they have mastered certain things, yung vision nila is very clear.
Why do we need to know about the deceased Gamaba winners we have featured here and the ones still living who will make up Season 4 of Dayaw? There are many answers to that question, but the one I want to ask you now is this. Has this brief encounter with the work of these Filipinos left you enriched, inspired, perhaps even saddened at their demise. They affect us in ways more profound than you can ever imagine. The sound of a kudyapi, a powerful chant, a poem, the gradually unfolding design of a textile. In this fragmented world we live in, what are these but frail threads that link us to a deeper appreciation of who we are and what we may be losing in our culture? These manlilikha ng bayan masters may be gone, but it is our duty never to forget them. The nation may have given them an outstanding honor, but in the end, it is their work that honors the idea of a diverse yet inclusive nation, a nation that hopefully will come to value Dayaw, our knowledge, our pride.
Padayon